for many of us, we went to sleep in one world and woke up in another, right?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
And part of any sort of, and so we should probably call this what it is, a trauma. And part of what happens in trauma, a grieving process, because the world that we lost, the world we expected is not here,
All right.
is a struggle through suffering to learn to live in a new world, right?
Right.
So if you have a pet that dies, you have to suddenly live in a world where that pet is no longer there, parent, friend, whatever the case may be. So part of what grieving does is it demands of us to be able to do that. So I think that for many of us, one of the emotions we may be feeling now, initially it could have been fear, it could have been just generally overwhelmed. I think right now I'm in a place where I'm experiencing a little more grief because there's been a couple of days.
Right. Right.
And so,
and time, by the way, time does heal, as they say. So maybe this is
well,
maybe this is an additive ingredient to how to deal with this as well. Just some time.
Well, I mean, and trust me, on the day of, there were several folks, patients I talked with, who were not happy with it. First off, they didn't want any optimism out of me. And
right.
they didn't
look on the bright side. No, that's not working.
But something you said there is important is, particularly with overwhelming emotions, we want to remember that they're temporary. They come and they go. They're like a wave. They come, they go, they crest, and then they leave. And what can hit us in moments where in the middle of that wave, we can experience them as forever, and that generates despair. That is sort of the psychosis of despair, that the feelings that we have now are forever. And, you know, the advice that I've been able to try to give to those folks who've been suffering before is always remember self-care. Remember to be able to, this is a time that you want to bring the things that give you light, the things that are emotionally nutritive, whatever it is you want to call it, they're good. They're good for you. I spent the morning at the gym listening to Bob Dylan blues songs.
Okay.
You know, because, what was it? There's another lyric he said that struck me this morning. I'm glad we fought. I only wish we'd won. Psychoanalytic concept for what we're talking about here is called the intrusion of the real. And the idea is that anything that comes at us, even the most basic sensory bit of data, is not perceived. It's apperceived. It is woven into what we already have in place. So there are maps, there are all these sorts of things that happen. So the data comes at us and we create it as it arrives, right? So there's this dance between us and the world.
Right.
An intrusion of the real, that's anything that arrives before we have a chance to do that creation. It hits us before we can think, feel it, or if you want to be poetic, dream it. So it hits us, and then we have to and that's how trauma works.
Right.
We have to find some way to integrate that experience. We have to weave it into who and what we are, our past, present, and future. And the bigger the trauma, the harder it is. If you've worked with folks who've experienced, serious trauma, they can't integrate the event. I was talking with someone a couple of days ago who had pretty serious sexual trauma, and how they've been working for decades to try to eventually be able to integrate that, to be able to make it, and part of what happens in the integration, our goal in therapy always is to turn our ghosts into ancestors. And a trauma that we can't integrate is not something that has passed. It still is. To be able to forget something, you have to remember it first. And so we have to think about, so part of the work for all of us who are experiencing this, and again, if it had gone the other direction, that would have been the other guys having to experience it, is over time, we have to do something with the real. And if we don't, there's a term that's called an orphan of the real.
Okay.
And folks who are severely dissociative, folks that have psychotic episodes based on, can often be, quote, orphans of the real. They're currently unable to create the world they're in, and so they can't live in it. They either have to divorce themselves from it, or they have to come up with delusions and hallucinations to be able to navigate it as best they can. I decided this morning after I got back from the gym, I was giving myself about an hour. I just sort of laid on the couch with my cats, and I even turned off music, and I was just in the quiet. and I just listened to the birds outside, and I could see the wind was swirling in the trees a bit, and just allowed myself a space of quiet, right?
Right, right. I
And
think I
there's
understand that.
nothing wrong with that. Music is also something that's really important to me. So
Sure.
I am on the way drive up here. I was listening to things that might resonate with me. What are things that I think that's important. I the idea of those things and all those things can allow you to be able to hold on to and maintain a perspective. Also, we say in the shrink business that we want to mind our ABCs, meaning that we want to be able to think about how we can affect our feeling. That's the A, affect. How we can affect our behavior. That's the B, and our thinking. That's the cognition. So as we move through this, we want to sort of think about all those things: what to do with our feelings, how to be able to modulate our behavior in a way that's healthy, and also do something with the things that we think. If you're overwhelmed with feeling, and then you start thinking it's the end of the world, and then you start eating 10 Big Macs all at once. That is a wonderful, maybe temporary solution, but it's a lousy long-term one. The goal
Right.
is, how do we do at each of those stations? What do we give ourselves that we can be able to navigate this a little different? What comes out of post-traumatic growth, first and foremost, is an awareness of your own vulnerability. That we walk around with a defensive mask. We assume things in a way that they aren't. And that is, we actively avoid our own vulnerability. So that is part of what comes out. That's not the bright side. That is, things are tough, and in many ways, you shield yourself from some toughness that you need to face up to. Right? That's
Right.
the thing. And connected to that, it makes us aware of how that easily that bubble can be burst. It makes us aware of what we call unthought knowns, parts of ourselves that we don't often have to deal with because we find ways to ignore them. So there are things about yourself that you learn that you don't want to know. Not me states, meaning that this is, I'm feeling this, but it's not me. I'm not going to own it. Those are all
Right.
there. It forces us to think about ourselves and our fellow people differently as well, and there are both good and bad things that come with that. All of
Right.
that's there. So I don't think that's necessarily look on the bright side, but it is open your eyes and see more than you could have seen before.
Right.
What you do with that could be bright or dark, right? It could be. And that's where I mentioned the book about the difference between hope and optimism. The goal is to be able to see those things and still hold on to some changes that you want to make, to hold on to a future that you can still move closer to and work towards. Now, I'm aware that is not necessarily a conservative way of thinking about the world. That is a liberal left way of thinking about the world. And that, what's the famous, it's attributed to Gandhi where they said, what did he say? What do you think about Western civilization? He said, it's a good idea. When are you guys starting?